and welcome to a meeting of Brant County Council. Happy New Year to those that we haven't seen since the break. It seems like it was an awfully long break, and it seems like it's almost Easter, but it's not. But anyway, there's lots going on in the county of Brant, and thank you for taking the time to be here tonight. Attendance has been taken, noting that Councillor Kyle and Councillor Oakley are not going to be with us tonight. Everyone else is here and in the building, which is great. The second thing on our agenda is the land acknowledgement, and I believe Councillor McAlpine is going to do that for us.
As we gather, we acknowledge that we meet on the lands and territory of Mississaugas of the Credit First Nations, Six Nations of the Grand River, and the traditional territory of the Atinwanderaak. We remind ourselves that the county of Brant is situated on lands that are full of rich Indigenous history and home to many First Nations, Inuit and Métis peoples today. We recognize the significance of their contributions to the past, present, and the future of this land. As a county, we have shared responsibility for the stewardship of the land on which we live and work, and a commitment to truth and reconciliation calls to action. We commit to continuing learning, reflecting on our past, and working in allyship.
Thanks, Councillor. The third thing on our agenda is the approval of the agenda. Is there anything to be added to the agenda? Councillor Chambers has something.
Mr. Mayor, I know we're not supposed to add anything to this agenda, but I just wanted to make note that I noticed that a former member of Brant County Council has passed away and was one of the first representatives in the new amalgamated county, and that would be Vern Gale. And he represented at that time, it was Ward 14, and I got to know him well there, and he also was a past chairman of Community Futures, and I just wanted to make note and give condolences to the Vern Gale family.
That's great. Thanks for bringing that up. And he was also a very good member of our Rotary Club, so for many, many years. So thank you for bringing that up. Councillor Miller?
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, I got one question I'd like to ask under other business.
Under other business? Anybody else have anything to add to the agenda? Seeing none. Councillor Howes?
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Moved by myself and seconded by Councillor Pierce that the County of Brant Council agenda for January 14th, 2025 be approved.
As amended. All those in favor? Oh, thank you. Declaration of pecuniary interest. Does anyone see one? Now, no. If you see one that comes up, could you please let me be the first to know? Delegations, petitions, and presentations. We don't have any other than the ones that are scheduled on the under the Planning Act. Adoption of the minutes of the previous meeting from December the 3rd. Councillor Bell.
Moved by myself and seconded by Councillor Miller that the County of Brant Council minutes of December the 3rd, 2024 be approved.
Are there any questions to the minutes of December the 3rd? Seeing none, we'll call the vote to receive. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Is there any new business arising from those minutes? No. Seeing none, we'll move to number 8 on the agenda, which is a public hearing under the Planning Act to receive information from the public. This is about 13 Burwell Street, parking issues. Because there's so many people involved in this presentation, maybe I can get a motion from council to remove the 10-minute limit so we can speak longer if we need to. Councillor Howes and Councillor Pierce, everyone else is okay with that? All those in favor? Thank you. Okay, so we'll go to 8.1, and Dan, you're going to start us off. And I will ask for a mover to get it on the table. Councillor Coleman, and seconded by Councillor McAlpine. And I will call the public meeting open now and then call on Dan to start the presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is a zoning bylaw amendment application for a property located at 13 Burwell Street in Paris. This is related to the New Paris Library site, and this application is initiated by the County of Brant, and the agent on behalf of the County of Brant are AJ Clark and Associates, who are with us this evening to speak to their planning justification. This presentation is being provided for information purposes only, so no decisions would be made this evening. So I'm sure we're all aware of the site and the project in general. The site is identified on the screen, the location there. The site is approximately 0.37 hectares with frontage along Church Street, Burwell, and Dumfries. The existing site contains the Bucket Center or former Paris Town Hall, which is currently designated National Historic Site of Canada. Again, just really quickly, the outline of the project in general. This is the new Paris main branch library with an area of approximately 3,000 square meters, greater than 3,000 square meters. The project involves restoration of the building's heritage elements, construction of an addition, establishment of landscaped outdoor program space, a parking area, sidewalks, and lighting. Although it's being referred to as a library space, the community-related use involves much more, including the uses identified on the screen related to a lobby reception area, collections area, various age-specific areas for quiet reading and studying, teaching and meeting rooms, administration offices and related washrooms, including multi-use flex space, retail food and drink, and space for events. And you'll see the conceptual rendering provided by DPAI Architecture Inc. That have been provided through various other stages of this project. In terms of planning's involvement with this application, we have initiated a site plan control review of the project to review everything outside of the building. So development of the site outside of the building. A lot of work has been put into developing the uses and the breakdown of the spaces on the inside. So site plan control is everything on the outside. A number of studies have been provided, plans in support of the application, which include the items on the list. Specifically, this evening we're here to speak to the zoning application components, which included a planning justification report, a parking study, and a public consultation open house hosted by the agent on behalf of the county that was held on December 12th. So you'll see the site plan layout. I've highlighted some of the key areas in colors, specifically the building footprint. We have the existing building, which contains kind of that yellowy area. The hatched portion is the existing building to remain. The new addition is the larger footprint in yellow with no hatch. The parking being provided off-street is highlighted in purple, and there's approximately a total of 27 spaces, which includes the 2 accessible spaces. The blue areas outside of the property line are identified as on-street parking and loading. So these are spaces that will primarily serve the function of this site, but are being provided outside of the property lines. And this includes approximately 13 spaces with a loading area. The zoning application, although the notices include a very comprehensive, long chart form breakdown of all of the amendments proposed to facilitate this development, and I've kind of summarized those into 3 different areas. One is amendments required to recognize existing zoning deficiencies related to building height and setbacks along Church Street. And you can see the frontage along Church Street highlighted in the red box number 1. So that's to deal with those existing setbacks that currently don't meet zoning. And so we've chosen, since we're going through this process, we've chosen to include them to recognize them. The second portion are dealing with the proposed additions. So allowing the new reduced street setbacks along Church Street and Burwell for the proposed addition. And again, this is just in recognition of the existing deficient setbacks of the existing building and trying to maximize the site and provide a building or a build form that matches the existing area. And the third part is parking and loading. So this is the amendment required to permit the reduction in the required number of parking spaces, the types of parking spaces, and their location of the parking spaces. And I'll get into the parking and loading in a little bit more detail. So really simply, the parking requirements have been calculated based on the gross floor area of the entire building. This includes all the various spaces within the building, including the basement. The required parking space based on a library use, so again, assessing the entire building as one use, is one parking space for 40 square meters, and this requires a total of 92 parking spaces. The site plan as shown on the screen identifies 25 standard parking spaces being provided within the property boundaries on site. The barrier-free parking is based on the required parking is required to provide 4 barrier-free parking spaces on site. 2 are proposed to be provided on site. And loading required 3 based on the size of the building, and 0 loading spaces are being proposed on site. Now you'll see my notes on the screen as part of this presentation. So the zoning bylaw, in terms of zoning compliance, required parking is only calculated and considered for those spaces being provided on site. But I will note that additional 13 spaces and 1 loading space are being provided directly adjacent to the building, being formalized along Church Street and Burwell Street, shown in blue, to primarily serve the function of this building. So although only 27 spaces are being provided on site as part of this project, additional 13 are being formalized, and a loading space located in a location that best serves the function of this building based on the layout and location of the elevators and the loading doors. I also mentioned that the parking calculations are based on the gross floor area. Again, this is the entire building. The parking requirements have been assessed as the entire building as a library use. There are alternatives to calculating parking, but we feel that this was the most straightforward, most basic way to assess the required parking. Recognizing that the building is used for much more at varying times of the day, where the demands during the day and the evening could be offsetting. So as I mentioned, some key considerations. Planning justification report was prepared by A.J. Clark and Associates, who are with us this evening to speak to the planning justification report. A parking study was prepared as well, and we do have our consultant from LEA Consultants with us virtually to speak to any questions about the parking study. The public consultation, as I mentioned, was held here in council chambers on December 12th, which was hosted by A.J. Clark and was well attended by residents. I've provided a bit of a feedback summary. Comments received as part of that public consultation were included within the addendum and the package this evening. Generally, support for the project in general. We did have some concerns about availability of on-street parking, recognizing that there's existing uses that utilize those spaces at varying times throughout the week, evenings and weekends, and the increased demand that would be placed on those existing parking spaces if we brought another use to the area that required use of those spaces. So concerns about conflicting or competing uses for those available on-street parking spaces. And then there were some concerns identified about the scope of the parking study, just review of the existing library branch in comparison to others throughout the county. I will note that, as part of that general support for the library, there were a lot of very refreshing comments made by residents who do live directly in the area, recognizing where they live, wanting to see redevelopment of this site with something, preferably a community use such as this. Part of that is identifying is this the right location for such a use? We have a surrounding area that currently exists of a range of existing related community uses. The graphic on the screen was prepared by our agent from AJ Clark, so I didn't want to reinvent the wheel, so I'm sharing it as well because I think it conveys a very clear message where we have the inner circle is a 500-meter radius and the outer circle is 800 meters. These are considered reasonable walking distances, and we currently have this is an established residential area with a range of unit types and permissions for through zoning, current zoning, for a range of mix of uses. We are within close proximity to the downtown core and larger commercial, institutional, recreational facilities. And there is on-street parking permitted. Some areas and some streets with restrictions based on time and day. However, this is a proposed community use being proposed within an existing established area. So that was existing. Let's look at the future, and for the future, we're looking at our new official plan. The site is located in the heart of a community node and community corridor area. The community node itself is the darker orange. It's intended to be the focal point of public services, commerce, and social interaction. And the surrounding community corridor is supposed to be intended to be that transition between the nodes and larger residential, commercial, and employment areas, offering higher density and mixed use. What I see when I show this as future, it also shows the vision of what this area is intended to be, given the direction outlined in our new official plan. So it's not just intensification of this specific site for community-related uses. It's also the opportunities for redevelopment and some gentle intensification for the surrounding area. So in terms of process, this is the public information meeting, the statutory public meeting, again being presented for information purposes only. It is intended that a staff recommendation, staff report will be presented to council at the end of this month on the 28th. That being said, I'm happy to answer any questions. Again, just recognizing that we do have our agents with us this evening to speak to some of the more technical aspects of the justification. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan. If there's any questions to Dan first, or you can wait until you hear from the delegation, whatever you like. Is there any questions for Dan? Seeing none, can I invite the delegate? I don't know how many of you are here. A couple at least, if you want to come up to the podium. And if you could just state your name and who you represent for the clerk, that'd be great. I think we all know, but.
And to be clear, Mr. Mayor, with me today is the consulting team, so that we will be available for any questions you may have. So, good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the committee. My name is Franz Kleitbofer, and I'm a registered professional planner and principal at AJ Clark and Associates. We have been retained as outside planning consultant to review the proposal against all legislative land use planning documents and to provide an analysis of the proposed zoning bylaw amendment. With me tonight in support of the proposal is Mr. David Premi and Petra Matar. Both are principal architects at DPAI Architecture, and Petra is with us virtually. Also virtually is Jocelyn Wallen, who is a transportation engineer with LEA Consulting and is the author of the supportive transportation parking study and transportation traffic analysis. I would like to thank my friend Mr. Nemizniak for a very fulsome and complete presentation. And in fact, Mr. Nemizniak's presentation is so complete that I'm able to abbreviate my presentation to really focus on the specific matters at hand. So thank you to Mr. Nemizniak for that. Generally speaking, the main purpose of this particular application is to gain approval for a parking reduction which will facilitate the rehabilitation and adaptive reuse of arguably one of the most significant heritage structures, certainly in the county and quite possibly southern Ontario. As you can see here, the restoration and renovations are quite extensive and include not only the restoration of the heritage structure, but also a modern addition that sensitively complements this asset, repurposing it into a community hub and public library. Other amendments beyond the parking requirements are proposed and were quite well laid out by Mr. Namizniak. However, are only necessary to recognize certain existing elements of the structure and parts of the new addition. Each of these amendments are minor and have no perceived negative impacts. And in fact, in my experience, Mr. Mayor, such bylaw amendments would typically be within the purview of committee adjustments as a minor variance application. However, we do have a parking matter that needs to be addressed. And to streamline the process, while also addressing the most relevant impacts of the parking proposal, we have wrapped all the identified zoning deficiencies into one proposed site-specific bylaw, which is included in the attachment number 3 of your package at page 60. And to be clear, that's page 60 of the Planning Justification Report. We do include the draft bylaw along with that package. Brant County and the town of Paris have an incredible opportunity with this proposed development. Not only will the project provide an excellent institutional and cultural community asset and services, but it will also rescue and conserve this cultural heritage element and national historic site, creating a landmark facility and a proud national example of heritage conservation and adaptive reuse. I have to say to this council, I consider this an honor to be a part of as a planner. Almost never in anyone's career do you get to bring forth and renew a national historic site. So this is quite an honor to me. Thank you. It will certainly be a project to be proud of as a community and create a legacy to be passed on to future generations. Here you can see a rendering of the proposed lobby interior that highlights the existing heritage structure throughout the interior site and very effectively melds the more modern elements with the historic elements. And here you see an interior shot of the modern addition. Now, please note that this slide is really to show the architecture of the space. The ultimate fit out and programming of these spaces will be determined by library staff and city staff or town staff, county staff as we move forward. Here we see a rendering or conceptual rendering of the children's section, reading section. Now, Mr. Mayor, this current conceptual site plan and focus of this application, as I previously mentioned, is in regard to the proposed parking. Currently, 25 typical spaces are provided on site, along with 2 barrier-free spaces for a total of 27 on-site parking spaces. However, as Mr. Namizniak pointed out, the proposal also includes 13 on-street parking spaces, including 1 barrier-free space. These spaces can be seen here along Church Street and Burwell Street, respectively. This results in a total of 40 spaces for the proposed development on site or within or close to the limits of the site, certainly within the block that is being proposed. The County of Brant zoning bylaw calculates parking based on total gross floor area. Now, a library use requires 1 space per 40 meters squared. The total GFA of the proposed structure, including the existing heritage structure, is 3,647 meters squared. It's important to note that this includes the mechanical penthouse and basement, which represents approximately 1,000 square meters of that GFA. Among other areas also that do not necessarily increase parking demand. For example, the basement will maintain the original heritage jail area, and while also providing storage for the Brant County Library System, along with some additional mechanical areas. Obviously not huge parking generators. As per the bylaw definition, this would require the facility to provide for a total of 92 parking spaces, warranting an additional 4 barrier-free spaces for a total of 96 spaces. As I mentioned, this is based on total GFA of the building and not necessarily parking generating GFA. As I've mentioned previously, we have mechanical penthouses. We have a historical construction with significantly wide walls. All GFA is calculated to the exterior of the wall. There were also portions of the basement which are historical in nature. They provide for that original jail area, which we want to maintain, and is mainly being used for storage. As we're aware, storage does not necessarily require any kind of parking. LEA consultants were retained to analyze the development to specifically determine if the proposed parking is sufficient. Now, this slide summarizes the findings of this report, which was included in its entirety within the zoning amendment submission. While not required, the site does provide for 14 bicycle parking spaces and two electrical or scooter spaces. The bylaw requires 92 plus 4 spaces. The plans provide for 27 on site and 13 adjacent for a total of 40 spaces once again. Rationale has been provided in regard to how this supply will meet anticipated demand. To estimate projected parking demand associated with the proposed development, peak demand was calculated based on the busiest peak hour of each survey date for the 2 proxy sites that were considered. The highest observed parking demand across both library sites was used to select the peak hour. Peak parking demand at the proxy library locations ranged from 0.37 to 0.62 spaces per 40 meters squared. This is obviously significantly below the bylaw requirements. Predicted parking demand was determined by applying observed peak proxy demand on each date to the proposed supply and the residual supply on adjacent streets. What we found was that the proposed parking supply can accommodate the predicted parking demand on Thursday and Saturday without requiring the use of adjacent on-street parking, meaning those areas on Church and Burwell. Predicted parking demand during Friday peak hours is expected to result in some vehicles on the adjacent street for a short duration. Given the residual supply available on Church Street and Burwell Street, it was found that a minimum of 10 spaces will remain available on street during that time period. Based on these findings, the traffic engineer concluded that the proposed parking demand is appropriate and will adequately accommodate demand associated with the proposed library use. The secondary use of an assembly hall or banquet hall is also proposed. This will provide a rental venue for a wide range of community events and will only operate outside library hours. It's very important to remember that. We are not looking at a combined rate here because they will operate independently as we've been advised. As per the zoning bylaw, an assembly hall or banquet hall would require a parking ratio of 1 space per 8 seats or 1 space per 35 meters squared, whichever is greater. Based on a per seat calculation, if the capacity is maxed at 150 persons, as is proposed, this would require 19 spaces, which can be accommodated on site. To calculate the GFA of the use, we can look to the floor plans provided and how those floor plans will operate. The basement GFA, which I've talked about a fair amount at this point, is rounded up to a total of 123 meters squared. The first floor is rounded up to 404 meters squared and is shown in pink here. And the second floor is rounded up to 637 meters squared as showed here. The mechanical penthouse beyond that is 94 meters squared. This provides a total GFA for the secondary use rounded up to 1,258 meters squared. So that's the assembly hall or banquet hall. As per the bylaw, if based on 1 space per 35 meters squared of GFA, an assembly hall of this size would require 36 parking spaces plus 4% barrier free or 2 spaces, which equals 38 spaces in total. And as I've mentioned, we're sitting at 40 between both the on-site and the in proximity off-site parking as a total. The on-site and adjacent on-street parking therefore proposes to provide more than assembly hall use of this size would require as per the zoning bylaw. Now, Mr. Chair, I just want to take you through some of the official plan policies that really inform the rationale for this project. All levels of planning legislation, including the Planning Act, Provincial Planning Statement, and the Brant County Official Plan, provide direction to develop urban areas, specifically the built-up area, in a compact built form to support complete communities and to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. This means developing our urban environments to provide an efficient use of all resources, including land and infrastructure, to create walkable, complete communities that offer a mix of uses to support each community and neighborhood. This facilitates a reduction in vehicle dependency. It is in the Community Vision and Fundamental Assumptions chapter of the Brant County Official Plan that states a compact built environment will be created that enables physical activity, the building of social connections, positive health outcomes, and resiliency through an evolving urban form supported by sustainable mobility options and reducing vehicle dependency. This is implemented through numerous policies in the official plan. Mr. Mayor, specifically Part 5, Policy 1.7.2 includes objectives to reduce the modal share trips by automobile while simultaneously increasing the modal share of trips by walking. Additionally, the Transportation Demand and Management section of the OP, specifically Part 5, Policy 6.3.1, states that the goal of the county is to increase the modal share of alternatives to the automobile. Part 5, Policy 6.3.3 continues to state parking requirements can be adjusted where it has been shown that the alternative options are available, sufficient parking exists, and or where examples of similar developments have been supported with similar ratios. Now, as I mentioned earlier, that is exactly what the LEA parking study does. It has looked at other similar rates for other libraries in and around the county and in and around Paris. Part 5, Policy 1.15.18 states that parking shall be designed to meet the needs of residents and businesses for the average demand as determined through appropriate surveys. Once again, this has been very thoroughly addressed through LEA's study and its examination of other library sites. Part 5, Policy 1.15.20 allows for shared parking through parking agreements to recognize dynamic parking needs at various times of the day. A site-specific provision has been requested to allow for such agreements, should they be desired in the future, which does add an additional layer of flexibility if required in the future. In summary, each level of planning and legislation encourages this very form of development and directs development to accommodate for active transportation and public transit while aiming to reduce the dependency on private automotive transportation. To facilitate this development, several variances are required to permit the existing structure and facilitate this new addition. The primary item requiring our attention, as I've clearly stated, is the proposed parking reduction, which through the submitted evidence in the parking study completed by LEA consultants can be supported. The County of Brant and the Town of Paris have a fantastic opportunity to create an incredible landmark facility that will provide for community services while conserving a natural historic site within an existing neighborhood. This development is entirely in line with the visions and goals of the county, not to mention the province of Ontario. The proposed amendments to the Brant County zoning bylaw have regard for matters of provincial interest, are consistent with policies of the provincial planning statement, and they conform to the policies of the Brant County official plan. This development checks virtually every policy item throughout all levels of planning legislation, and that is a true rarity in my profession. It's an excellent example of building a healthy, complete community and planning for the needs and demands of current and future residents. It is my professional planning opinion that this development, in its current concept, represents good planning and should be approved. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My team and I would be happy to answer any questions your committee may have.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Questions from council? Councillor Miller, you're first.
Thank you, Mr. Mr. Mayor, a couple questions. Those on-site parking spots, will staff be using those?
Yes, they would, and that is part of the consideration when a parking requirement is generated. It's not just for people attending the site, it is also for those working at the site.
Do we know how many will be taken up by staff?
I don't know
I
that
know
number
it'll
right now.
vary, but
I don't know that number right now, no.
is that number that you guys looked at?
I'm sure that there were discussions between the parking consultant and that, but you have to understand, sir, that when parking rates are calculated, that is actually considered back when the bylaw was passed, when a rate of 1 space per 40 meters squared was prepared. So that is part of the background studies that would establish that base zoning requirement.
Okay, I just asking the questions.
Fair enough.
So they're not all for the public or the users. The on-street parking, is that exclusive to this library?
No, it is not exclusive to the library. That would be, the on-street parking would be available to the general public as well. So we are providing additional parking to the neighborhood as a whole that are beyond just the on-site parking.
Okay, so when we're looking at total parking spaces, we're looking at on-street parking, but those may not be available because they could be taken by other residents.
Yes,
Okay.
I would agree
Thank
with
you.
that statement.
You talked about walkability, and I appreciate that. Active transportation, certainly that's something we encourage. But this is, at the end of the day, a building, a library, a center for the entire county. So to talk about walkability for a lot of people, it's not practical, right? It's just simply not. I'm not going to walk from Burford to here. I'm not going to bike from Burford. So I don't know if that's been accounted for or not. Accessibility. You've got one off-site, or accessible parking. You've got one off-site and 2 on-site.
Yes.
Tell me the thought process, and maybe we go to, is it LEA on that one? How do you justify that we're good with 2 on-site, 1 off-site? Can you walk me through that?
Certainly. So there's a couple of things to comment on there, and I am going to turn this over to LEA very quickly. But what I would say in terms of addressing whether we have 3 or 4, which is the requirement, is that there is room next to the existing space, or next to the space that is proposed along Church Street, to add another if you would like. Now that will affect the 13 that are off-site, but it's not included within the zoning bylaw. So it is something, sir, that can be very easily addressed through the site plan process, and simply another accessible space could be added for that. It will result in a reduction of the overall parking, but I'm in your hands as to how you'd like to proceed with that. Now, in regard to why 3 spaces instead of 4 spaces is appropriate, I'd be happy to pass that question on to Jocelyn Wallen.
Is she on mute?
She was on here earlier. I can see her
see
right
her.
now.
Oh, sorry everyone. Can you hear me now?
Absolutely.
Excellent. Sorry about that. I was just on mute there. So it's a good question that you ask on the accessible parking spaces. Typically, we try to strive to be providing accessible parking spaces as appropriate for the site and based on the zoning bylaw. In this case, like you pointed out, we do have a bit of a deficiency right now from the 4 spaces to the 3 spaces. I will say that based on the AODA requirements, we are satisfying the minimum number of accessible parking spaces that are required. So typically based on AODA, the total number of parking spaces, accessible parking spaces required are that same 4%, but it's based on the total number of parking spaces for the use. So in that case, we still would be meeting the accessible parking requirements. And then, as mentioned, there is an opportunity to be providing more if required.
Okay. One more question and one comment, and the question, it might be have to go through staff. Has the accessibility committee seen this? Have they given input? That's a no. Do we know, Dan? Okay. I would appreciate if they had a look at it, and then the comment I would offer, because as as pointed out, the on-street parking is open to anybody. The on-site, we can guarantee it's for the user. So the only thing I would suggest, but maybe you guys can relook at this, is take that one accessible off-site and put it on-site, and that gives you at least 3 that are protected. Otherwise, like I say, anybody could park there. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you. At this point, I'd like to call on Councillor Oakley. First of all, welcome to the meeting. You've been here for a few minutes. I saw you sneak in there, and you have your hand up, which means you have something to add to the conversation.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I actually just want to, I want to pop on here and follow up with what Councillor Miller was saying, where, you know, one of our strategic goals in the county is to lead in accessibility. So even though the current proposal, I think, meets AODA requirements, I think it's you know, we have a duty at the county to meet our own standards. So I would really like to see in this proposal that we have all 4 of those spots on site, even if it sacrifices some standard parking. I think particularly considering the use case and the clientele of the library, I think it's particularly important that we ensure that it is fully accessible and we have all of the required spots as per our own standards. So when it's relevant, I would be interested in making an amendment that we do so, or by whatever process we feel comfortable in doing that.
Thank you. Petra, you have a question or an answer?
Hi, everyone. Hello, members of the committee. I just wanted to add something to the location of the on-street parking, and one of the reasons that we included that over there is because it is adjacent to the proposed entrance to the event hall off of Church Street. So something to consider is for events, most members of the public will be entering through that entrance. So providing for an accessible parking space over there would be appropriate as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Alicia, you want to speak to Councillor Miller's question?
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. Through Your Worship, to Councillor Miller's question. So just to clarify with regards to at what point this goes to the Accessibility Advisory Committee, with regards to the zoning itself, that would not normally go to them, nor is there time on this particular application, but what will go is the site plan itself. So once the zoning is approved, or if the zoning is approved, and we move on to the site plan process, or we finalize that, it would be at that point that we would consult with accessibility with regards to the site plan in its entirety.
Thank you. Jocelyn, do you have something?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, I did just want to respond to the comment on the adjacent on-street parking and it being non-exclusive just for the library. As part of our parking study, we did do a survey of the demands on the adjacent streets. And so we had found that based on the 34 spaces that are available on street, the peak demand and considering the peak demands of the parking for the library were, peaking at different times, and even considering some of the adjacent on-street spaces being used by other uses, with the addition of the library and the on and off-site spaces, there is anticipated to still be residual parking in the area overall.
Thank you. Councillor Howe is your next, and then Councillor Garneau.
Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor, through you. And I'm not sure if this is a question for Franz or for Dan. But I'm thinking about Councillor Miller's point. I'm respectful of, we would all agree that nobody's going to walk from Burford or ride their bicycle from Burford. However, in the walkable community objective, there's the vision that people will park nearby and walk to their destination. And I'm looking at the one satellite photo that's in our package, and there's a yellow circle representing a 500-meter radius and a red circle representing an 800-meter radius. And does someone have, can someone translate that to me to walk time? And can someone discuss the number of public parking spots that are available within those circles? I'm just wondering if that information is available.
Well, Councillor, I can speak to those two concentric rings because it is based on some pretty solid rationale. In the preparation of the growth plan back in, I believe it was can't remember which iteration it was. We've had so many different changes to these provincial policies over the last little while. They introduced a concept called a major transit station area. And through that analysis and the background reports, the province looked at what certain walking distances were to establish what a catchment area of some of these major transit station areas would be in some of these larger municipalities with mass transit systems such as Hamilton, Mississauga, Toronto, so on and so forth. And when they looked at that, they realized that a 10-minute walking distance is approximately 800 meters. And in fact, if you look at, I believe, policy, I think it's 1.2 or 1.3, possibly 1.4 of the provincial policy statement, there's actually a policy within there that speaks to areas within, under the MTSA policies, that speaks to an area within 800 meters specifically being within walking distance, or a 10-minute walk is how they establish it. So that was some of the rationale behind why we chose those concentric rings and why you see 500 meters and 800 meters. And that is because based on provincial policy, that is the effectively the definition for what a 10-minute walk is. In regard to parking spaces in the area, I'm going to have to leave that to my friend, Mr. Nemizniak.
Thank you. Just to address it at the more local level, we, within that 500 meters, we are getting into the downtown. We're getting darn close to the health hub. These are areas that have large parking areas with, a changing demand throughout the day and the evenings. On the larger circle, we're getting to Lions Park. We're getting to more parking within the downtown, and then towards the commercial areas along Dundas Street. So, within that 800 meters radius, we do have, the library as a destination, the downtown as a destination. We have our trail network as a destination or a route. So we do have lots of opportunities for people to travel from outside of the county or outside of Paris specifically, to park elsewhere or park near, and then enjoy the amenities around within a reasonable walking distance.
Thank you.
I wonder sir, if we should give our transportation consultant an opportunity to comment on that if necessary. Jocelyn, do you have anything to say in regard to the number of parking spaces?
I think you summed it up very nicely.
Excellent. Thank you, Dan.
Councillor Garneau?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I do have a few questions here, if I may. Yep. So one of the things that has been referred to tonight are these secondary parking agreements with neighboring properties, and recognizing within some of those radiuses they are sites owned by the county, but not all are. So if I recall correctly, the notice limit under the Planning Act is either 100 or 150 meters, but a number of these potential sites are outside of that limit. Given that we're talking about their lots tonight, was any effort made to notify these neighbors who were outside of the statutory requirement?
I apologize. A question directed at me?
No, I think it'll be a staff question.
So through the mayor to the councillor, so standard notice was given to the neighbors in the area, but there also would have been newspaper notice and things on our webpage. So other people could have read or seen it, but we weren't directing anything to people beyond the standard requirement.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm just working through my notes here. The statement, that our consultant also made this evening with regards to the official plan and walkable communities, and some of my colleagues have touched on this as well. Is there any caveat in that or consideration given when something is seen as a central facility rather than a local facility? Specifically, if it's used to justify a reduction in parking, is there a similar consideration given that the majority of users would in fact need to drive there? I observe a conflict in what I'm hearing about the project, and how's that handled in the policy language?
Okay, I do apologize, Madam. I'm not completely clear on the question. I know you're looking at this in terms of this is a central facility. We have parking located throughout the area. There are provisions to be able to speak to external proxy sites wherein we are able to make those comparisons. I realize that this is a central facility compared to maybe some of the others, but also I think it's important to note that those outside in the outer areas of the county also have facilities, perhaps in Burwell, perhaps in some of these places as well, that they would be able to utilize. I do apologize, I'm not completely clear on your question.
I'll take the response there.
Okay.
And then I guess the last one is with regards to the library demographics and the users, because typically when we hear from library staff, we understand that many of the users are people with children, be they parents, grandparents, caregivers, people with disabilities, seniors, whatnot, who perhaps may not qualify for an AODA accessible parking sticker, but have additional considerations when determining whether something's walkable. So I'm just wondering if we have considered that when recommending that parking requirements be reduced.
Well, what I would say is that in regard to the walkability area, that obviously was established, as I mentioned, based on the provincial policy statement, or the provincial planning statement, I guess, as we're calling it now in 2025. All of that would have been considered as an overall ratio for when that distance would have been established at 800 meters, and that would have been part of the consideration of the provincial planners at that time when that walking distance was established. And I'm sure that they look through that range of demographics, meaning people who may not be able to travel quite as far within that 10 minutes, and also consider people who can travel quite maybe much farther than that within that 10 minutes as well. And they've established this as a suitable ratio that can be applied across the board that considers all demographics.
Thank you.
Any, Councillor Bell?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to our presenter. You said that when you did the parking, or the results of the parking study were effectively that rather than it being one parking space per 40 square meters, you thought on the basis of the study it would be about a third or 2/3 of that.
Yes.
If I recall from the meeting that we had here in December, when the question was asked, how did you actually determine that? I think there was some concern that the process you followed didn't hold water. Specifically, you didn't actually ask the people that were in the library how they got there or where they parked.
Well, I can see that you have concerns regarding the basis of the study, and that being the case, I'd like to give the author of the study the opportunity to speak to your comments. Jocelyn, perhaps you can provide some rationale on that.
Thank you, and thank you for your comments. I think overall, when we're looking at our parking study and the methodology that we use to be conducting parking studies, a lot of times we deliberately don't ask people when they're coming into a library, where did you park? Did you come in a car? How many people were in your car? Because a lot of times, one, there could be some privacy concerns or people wouldn't want to be answering. But also a lot of times, by looking at the parking that's available, you're able to really get quantifiable data that is easier to be validated and confirmed. So a lot of times when we are looking at parking studies and looking at proxy studies for parking, we are looking at the actual cars that are in specific number of spaces at specific intervals. When we were looking at our proxy parking rates, we were able to find that the average peak hour demand rates, like you said, were between 0.37 to 0.62 spaces per the 40 meters squared, which is, about a third to 2/3 of the requirement, which is currently at 1 space per 40 meters squared. And those are based on the peak hour, so the highest hour of every day of the 3 days that we had conducted the survey.
Yeah, sorry, I don't think that holds any water at all, I'm afraid. If I was conducting a survey of people going to a library, trying to find out how they got there, I think I would simply ask them the question. So I think your analysis could be very flawed. People that use the parking spaces outside of the library could be going to jigs and reels. They could be dropping their kids off at Central School. They could be going down, because we don't have enough car parking on the high street, according to the majority of people in the town, they will park somewhere near. They wouldn't go near the library. So I think you have a flawed data set there on which you're drawing some pretty extensive conclusions. So I do not agree with them at this moment. I can be convinced if you can help me be convinced.
Would you like me to comment on that, or?
Does anyone want to comment to Councillor Bell?
Yes, what I would say, Councillor Bell, is that LEA is a very well-reputed consulting firm that does these types of studies all over Ontario, Canada, and beyond. And they have an exquisite background in terms of parking studies, and they're very well respected. So I do think that their basis upon which these parking studies is established is nationally recognized and is a standard that is held to many other jurisdictions as being quite acceptable.
I think we're just going to have to agree to disagree.
That's fine. We'll do that, Councillor Bell. Councillor Chambers.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm not going to get into a debate at this point. That would be inappropriate, I think. It is an information meeting, so I'm not going to challenge anybody, but I do have a question. And that question is probably directed to the author of the study, and that is with regard to the parking as it relates to the traffic patterns, as it relates to that intersection right there in front of the place and behind the place and around the corner going down into the town. That traffic pattern there is a little bit bizarre, and I'm just wondering how parking and traffic are going to mesh at certain times, and whether that was looked at in terms of whether it is a safe situation or what needs to be done to improve that.
I think that's really for you, Jocelyn.
Okay, thank you for your question. And you know, I do agree, and I can appreciate that intersection of Dumfries and Church there on the northwest corner of the site is a little bit interesting and atypical to what you would typically be expecting in an area like this. With regards to the off-street parking that is provided for the library, the access to that off-street parking is off of Burwell Street, so it is you know, almost as far away from that intersection as it could be, which then helps by reducing sort of the number of decision points that you have to be making to entering the driveway access there, and we wouldn't be expecting any conflicts as a result of the intersection just because it's a little bit further away. Along Church Street and for some of the on-street parking spaces, we have provided a bit of a gap between where that intersection is and where some of those spaces are, and then also appreciating the low speed limits that are in the area, as well as the local nature of the roads. We were anticipating that there wouldn't be any significant issues there. But I will say that the scope of our study was mostly related to the parking supply and the number of spaces, and not necessarily you know, questions related to the intersection and how those movements would be operating.
Thank you. Are there any other questions from council? None. Because I sit on the accessibility committee with Councillor Miller, we've gone through this situation before with accessible parking spots, because as you know, there's side load, there's end load, there are different dimensions. Two side-by-side accessible parking spots with a side load option for a wheelchair to come out and be dropped is different from a back load where it comes straight out and it's dropped. So no one knows who's going to be accessible and what that means. I've been to Quebec City many times, and I used to be able to walk up St. John's Hill on my own. And I've got Superman powers now, and I've been altered in many ways, and I couldn't walk that hill now. And so I don't consider myself handicapped or a disability, but I couldn't walk that hill that I've walked many times before. And I know there's people around this council table that are in the same situation. So it's not really the length of space or the footsteps you take. This is not Winnipeg. These are hills, the hills of Paris, and every time you turn around, there's somewhere to walk up or down. So, you know, you have to be in good health to do these circles, no matter what your measurements or your reasoning for having those circles. If you can't walk it, you can't walk it, and you don't need to be in a wheelchair or a walker to be handicapped or disabled in a way that you can't access those circles. I could never walk from downtown to the Bucket Center on my own in a timely fashion without stopping a couple of times. And I know that that's not exclusive to me. It's to many people in this room. And I just want to say that out loud because Councillor Miller and I do have a responsibility to the accessibility. We've had complete malls, access to strip malls have to be changed because they say that they're accessible spots, but they're not anywhere near the door that the people want to go into. So it's not a matter of saying there's 2 accessible spots. It needs to be 2 or 3 accessible spots in the right place, at the right size. And it's very important because the population's getting older, and the people that would be attending these events, I think, for the opera hall or the upper space will be of a certain age. And I think that we have to say all of that out loud because everyone's not built equally. And you don't need to be, as I said, in a wheelchair or a walker to have problems. So I just wanted to say that out loud. If there's no other questions for anyone around the council table, it is an open meeting. Is there anyone in the room that wants to speak to? Who do I have? Who did I miss on? Councillor Oakley, did you have your hand up or are you stretching?
Yes, Mr. Mayor.
Okay.
I was just wondering if it is appropriate time to ask our Director of Planning Services if an amendment would be needed tonight to make those sorts of changes to the accessible spaces, or whether or not that can be dealt with at the site plan level.
Okay, it's an open meeting, Councillor Oakley, so I'm going to open it up to the floor first to see if anyone wants to speak to or against this this information that's being brought forward today for information's sake. So is there anyone in the room that wants to speak for or against the application? Come on up. When you get up to the podium, if you'd like to state your name and your address. For the clerk, I know who you are and where you live, but I'm sure there's other people that don't.
Wasn't really expecting to speak, but impromptu, here we are.
Go for it.
My name is Janet Snaith. I live at 22 Church Street. I face down into that wacky intersection, kitty corner from the future library. And I think I'm just going to say that I've been there almost 28 years. It's hard to believe. And over that time, oh golly, for over 20 years of that time, it was run as an auction house, as many people here will know. And when they had their auctions on Saturdays, somewhat for the preview on the Friday night, but certainly for the auction itself, they would have hundreds of people in that room for the actual auction. I mean, it was cheek to jowl. Probably the fire department wouldn't have approved. But anyhow, and people parked everywhere. And we just sort of knew it. We're an old community. It's probably the same sort of thing when they have a big event downtown for blocking the street, and you know, they have their maple syrup festival or whatever. The library, the current library, has 5 spots. So I have no idea what the neighborhood thinks of parking under that sort of circumstance, but we were just sort of used to it. And, you know, it's an old community, it's what we do. No problems with having extra parking as a result of that auction. So it's just kind of what we do. And the I know at the other meeting we had, the owner of the Bayou restaurant was concerned. And I said, well, you know, I'm sure your patrons park up my street too. So, you know, lots of cars, lots of houses don't have driveways. I'm lucky to have one. But we all have to sort of park up the street or down the street or around the corner when the street's busy. So I really have never felt that there's been an issue with excess vehicles in the area. So that's my 2 cents.
Thank you. Is there anyone else in the room that wants to speak to or against the proposal? Is there anyone else in the room that wants to speak to or against the proposal? I'll ask for the 3rd time. Is there anyone in the room that wants to speak to or against the proposal? Seeing none, I'll declare it closed. And I am looking for a motion. I guess Councillor Oakley, if you have something to add, this might be the time. Councillor Pierce?
Mr. Mayor, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think we do an amendment to information.
To information received.
If if this comes through and it's received, at the next one, when there's a
Discussion.
when there's a decision from staff, that's when an amendment would be, unless I'm wrong.
Okay. Councillor Oakley, maybe you're a little ahead of yourself. I don't know. This is only for information, so I guess we really don't have to change anything. It's the whole package the way it stands. So be with us on the 28th, and you can decide what you want to do then. So it's in front of us. It's on the floor. It's being seconded. Do you need it read by the clerk, what we're voting on? So it's to receive as information. It's on the floor. It's got a seconder. All those in favor to receive? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. Everyone's still good without a break? Going to 8.2 then, please, which is 1324 Coburn Street East and 10 to 12 Papel Road. And Dan, that's yours again. And again, I'm going to get a mover to get it on the floor, Councillor Coleman and Councillor Pierce. It's on the floor. I'm going to announce that it is a public meeting and it's now open. And with that, I'll call on Dan to make his presentation. And again, this is for information only.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is a zoning bylaw amendment application for properties comprised of 1320, 1324 Colburn Street East and 18 to 20 Papel. And this is, again, the application has been submitted by the agent, Arcadis, care of Odette Gomes, and the owner, Polkan Construction, care of Bruno Artenozzi. And this is an application being presented for information purposes only. The subject lands are identified on the screen there. They have a total area of approximately 1.28 hectares. Again, the property has frontage along Colburn and Papel. And the property is, again, made up of 4 different addresses. So it's been consolidated or will be consolidated and redeveloped at this corner. So currently the property contains 2 existing detached dwellings, an existing dine-in takeout restaurant, and an existing landscape contractor's yard. The official plan, previous official plan, so this application was deemed complete under our previous official plan, so we are relying on our transition policies of our new official plan, which really allow for the applicants to decide on which policy regime they're going to proceed under. And I can get into that in a little more detail further in my presentation. But essentially, under our previous official plan, you'll see that the property has a split designation, employment in blue and general commercial in pink. And in our new official plan, you'll see that the property has an increased designation of employment in blue and community corridor on the smaller portion in orange. The zoning application, the current zoning bylaw identifies that the entire property is zoned commercial, C2, and you'll see surrounding land uses consist of a similar commercial C2 zoning and surrounding heavy industrial zones. So the proposal, essentially the applicants are proposing to develop the subject lands with what I'm going to describe as a commercial plaza with compatible industrial uses. And as part of this application, the applicants have prepared a long list of studies and reports to help justify the proposal. This is the rezoning application. The application will also require site plan control. So a lot of these items listed on the screen are to help satisfy technical requirements as part of the site plan control application. The rendering on the screen is shown, specifically this application relates to phase 2, highlighted in blue. This is the vision of redevelopment of this site for that industrial commercial plaza. You'll also see future phases in the rear of the building, and it's cut off to kind of the east portion of the site. But that is the site that's been discussed under separate applications, 1820 Papel, if you remember the parking requirements related to the dance studio. So this development is unrelated to that. However, it does fit within the vision of redevelopment of the lands owned by the owner. So here's the image just showing the traditional site plan concept that kind of implements the technical drawing that implements the rendering. Some key considerations. So we are dealing with new provincial policies. In October, provincial policy statement was updated, and there are no transition policies. So any decisions made, regardless of when the application was deemed complete, are required to conform with the provincial policy statement. And there are policies there that are new and are related to really separating and protecting employment areas. So that blue area, the blue designation, and prohibiting commercial uses being located within that designation. So this policy change has really resulted in us planning staff and the applicants to have some discussions on the approach with this application moving forward. Again, the official plan, the application was deemed complete under the previous official plan, so there may be some flexibility with the approach and any zone changes. But the applicants at the end of the day do have a site that is entirely zoned commercial, so they could proceed with a site plan that permits the uses in the C2 zone and no industrial uses, but they do have additional lands that will be developed separately. So we are working currently with the applicants to have those discussions to determine how this application looks or what this application looks like moving forward, if at all. Also looking at the zoning again, determining compatible uses. The idea was to add in compatible industrial uses to the C2 zone. And again, based on the provincial policy and official plan, we are having those discussions. Parking obviously is important. Not knowing who the users are, developing a site, we are looking to ensure that we are providing enough parking and flexibility to accommodate a range of uses once the site is developed, as this site is likely to be broken up into a number of different units. As I mentioned, site plan control and eventually perhaps a plan of condominium to establish the unit boundaries and ownership types. So in terms of process, this application has been circulated. We are reviewing and providing comments internally and with external commenting agencies. The application has been circulated to members of the public ahead of the statutory public meeting. And again, as I mentioned, the form of this application, those discussions are happening ongoing, and we will, if this application proceeds, we will be back with a recommendation staff report in front of council. Happy to answer any questions. I'll also note that Odette Gomes is with us virtually this evening to answer any questions. I don't believe she has a formal presentation, but she's with us to answer any questions.
Thank you, Dan. Odette, do you have anything to add before we go to questions? Hello.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just want to thank Mr. Nefniak just for all his hard work and dedication to this file. At this time, we are not going to be making a presentation, as we have some homework to do, given the new provincial policies that kind of come into play since we made this application. There's a few things that we have to consider and resubmit something back to you. So at this time, we'll just answer any questions that you may have, and we'll continue working with staff on this application. We thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Does council have any questions to either Dan or the presenter? Councillor Miller?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I feel like I need to go back to remedial planning after all the changes from the province in their own official plan. Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Dan, what do we call this? Obviously, it's not C2. Do we just call it employment lands?
Through Mr. Mayor, so I guess in planning, we're looking at a hierarchy of planning policy, and at the local level, we're looking at our official plan. So that's going to give us our land use designations.
Which is what?
Which
is going to be proposed.
The new official plan designates a portion of these lands as employment, so industrial, we'll call it, and then has that community corridor designation, as you can see up on the screen. And then our previous official plan, which they do have the ability, based on when the application was deemed complete, to go to establish zoning based on our previous official plan, which breaks up the property into employment lands to the north and commercial to the south. So the second hierarchy of the policy is the zoning, and that will establish the specific uses, building setbacks, parking requirements.
Okay, so you have a range of commercial. Could we put a dance studio in one of those?
Great question. The specific use of the dance studio, I'd have to take a look. The C2 zone permits a very wide range of commercial related uses, and I'd have to confirm if specifically this dance studio would be permitted.
Well, I'm asking because it come up before, and the reason I'm asking is because then you said compatible industrial uses. My question then is, what would be an example of an incompatible industrial use? Do we have? Is it listed? Do we have lists of what's compatible, or do you look at it on a site user by user basis?
Great question again through Mr. Mayor. So in this case, the discussions that we've had with the applicants, given the nature of the proposal, so they're developing it as a plaza with small units. So in my professional opinion, compatible may mean has everything to do with size and scale. So you may have an industrial use that's not permitted in the C2 zone, but because it's small and contained within one or two of those units, it may be considered more compatible because of the size and scale of the use that's proposed.
Okay, I like more black and white answers, but we'll leave it at that.
I think what he meant to say is you could have little dancers in there. Little dancers, maybe. Are there any other questions to either Dan or the applicant, the agent? Seeing none, is there anyone in the room that wants to speak to or against this application? I'll ask for the second time. Is there anyone in the room that wants to speak to or against this application? And we'll ask for the third time. Is there anyone in the room that wants to speak to or against this application? Seeing none, we will call the meeting closed, and we will go back to council to call the vote. It's going to be just received for information. There's no additions or adjustments. The way it's written is the way we'll vote on it. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. Public hearing under the Planning Act, we have none of those. Consent items, we have none. We have none. And we have a staff report, 11.1, and that's going to be Brandon.
Good evening, everyone. I'm just presenting a report. I'll just give a brief overview of what the purpose of this report is. So we're looking to start another study here. The housing needs assessment is a very important study. It'll kind of expand on the direction of our municipal comprehensive review and official plan, and will lead into the implementation pieces. So our new zoning, our new community planning permit system. We're coming to you with a request for some money in advance of the budget, and the reason we're asking for that is due to the gas tax fund. There's a requirement for some of this information that's related to this study to be submitted by the end of March in order for us to qualify for our funding. So we thought, let's do this now. We'll do it in advance of that. We'll kind of get started on this as part of the community planning permit system, but in order to do that, we're requesting that be approved ahead of the budget. So that's kind of the basis of this report, but we're also welcoming any feedback on the housing needs assessment. We've given kind of a high level example of what we're going to be looking at. The first kind of phase of the project itself is going to be very technical. It's all just the background analysis. That's what the federal government is asking for from us and is due to them in March. And then the second phase will be a more public-facing component. That's what we will we'll collect feedback from the public. We'll probably have some focus groups. We'll get some feedback from folks in a variety of different settings, development, community. We'll be talking obviously with the City of Brantford, and then we'll be looking at kind of tweaking our policies in the official plan and implementing anything through the community planning permit system that we might need to. So that's a very kind of high level presentation on that, but I welcome any feedback or questions from council.
I'm going to look for a motion to get it on the floor so we can talk about it. It's Councillor House and Councillor Pierce. Do you have a question, Councillor House?
Yes, please, Mr. Mayor, through you to Brandon. So the topic of housing needs is one of those topics that comes up in coffee shops and running into people on the street, and you mentioned about the public facing portion of this process, and clearly at that time there would be an opportunity. But we hear all the time about what are we doing to incentivize developers to build the types of housing that we need, rather than the types that are just the most profitable. And so, can you talk just a little bit more about where the spots are within this process to not just get the public feedback on it, but for council to evaluate the steps that we want to take to try and improve the range of types of housing that are offered to the people in this community?
Through the mayor, yes, thank you for that question. So that will come kind of in the second phase of this project. We first need to get kind of the data organized, updated in order to inform the decision making. And then of course staff can come forward with some recommendations based on stuff we know is kind of happening in the community. But come March or April, that's where those discussions will happen. We'll be able to have discussions about the specific types of housing we know we need, how far we may want to go with incentivization, if we want to do a community improvement plan, if we want to do DC incentives and that stuff. We're working very closely with development or with corporate services. So the finance folks are very involved with this study as well. So that component will be something that we can discuss at that time.
Any other questions? Councillor Miller and then Councillor Chambers.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I see you to Brandon. Brandon, you mentioned you're going to look at housing mixes, types, apologies. So I assume, reading that, you're going to look at, say, do we need row houses, more single detached, apartments, whatnot. Is seniors housing a mix or a type or something you would look at as well?
Through the mayor, absolutely. So there will be a component of this that looks specifically at housing for vulnerable populations. So whether that be seniors housing, those with disabilities, that will be a component of this as well. So we'll be looking at what exists in the county, what exists in Brantford as our housing service provider, but also then what our needs are for those.
Okay, so seniors in there, would affordable housing be in that?
Yes, it will.
Okay, and then the last one, I don't know how you incorporate it, but you know yourself, we all know, we have quite a few residents living in those trailer parks, which we've converted. So I don't know how you would address that in there, but.
Through the mayor, so that's definitely going to be a component, and working very closely on those projects with the trailer parks. We are well aware of kind of that need that the trailer park is filling, and we're going to have that discussion with our consultant about that as well.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Chambers.
Yeah, I don't really have a question, but I do have a request. Usually when staff introduce staff reports, they do it from the podium. I'm looking at Councillor McAlpine, and he has to read around like this. If he has it's just not the place to present reports. I don't mind if they answer questions from the side, but could I ask that future reports be given at the podium? And the other thing is, it shows up on the video, whereas this way it doesn't.
Absolutely, we'll fix that. Councillor Coleman.
Not to be argumentative, Mr. Mayor, but I kind of liked it this way. I didn't have to turn this way to look at the podium, so I enjoyed you sitting over there, Brandon. So,
which goes to show you there's two sides to every coin. So there you go. The housing discussion is really an interesting discussion, and you know what? Being on the homelessness committee with the city. you know what, is it getting someone out of the cold into a shelter, into a place where they don't get rained on and snowed on and they can sleep? Or is it a place that you're putting people that have things, that have possessions, that need to put things away and have storage, and bigger than a shoebox, smaller than a trailer? I think we've asked the builders enough times, and they're just not in the business of doing something that's so affordable that it's what we're looking for. I think we as a county need to step up and do something ourselves. We've been given lots of presentations lately by lots of different people of different models and different suitable places for people, not just to go to off the street into something. They need to be able to keep living. They need to be able to store their possessions and their things. It's not there's two completely different pieces that Brandon will probably have to address, and it's to get someone off the street. They just need to be safe, and they need to have enough place. They need to be able to live and sleep, and maybe have a hot plate and cook something. But that's not when life stops. They shouldn't be thinking about life stopping at 23 years old or 32 years old or whatever age they are, when they fall into this state of need, because they're going to keep living. I hope they're going to keep getting things and enjoying life and things like that. So there's a big part that's missing for me. And I've sat on all the committees. I've seen all I've seen all the presentations. I've seen all the mock-ups and all the blueprints of all these things. And we have to do the right thing, because there's an awful lot of space for us to do the wrong thing by just getting people a place to live. But it's not a forever home. Everyone wants a forever home. You can go to the Humane Society and they talk about forever homes. It's not a place. It's not like a group home to help them for a week or 2 weeks or a month. It's not like a hospice where you help them until they find this is the place that we're offering them as a house, as a place to live. So I think we have to be very careful that we don't put people into things that seem more affordable. They might be affordable, but they're not suitable and they're not sustainable. And I just feel so badly when I see these places that some people present to us, and yeah, it's a bed and it's a sink and it's a toilet, but that's all it is. And I mean, is that what we want to do? I think there's a need for that for homelessness, but I don't think it's a sustainable place for us to be as a county to offer forever homes or sustainable homes so that people can get there, relax, and then plan the rest of their life. So I hope we're not selling people short by saving $10,000 on a unit. I get very discouraged when they say, well, you could have, you could buy 25 of these or 30 of these. And I think, like, what do they do when they go in their door, when they sit in their chair? What do they do for the next 30 years of their life? Because if that's how they're living, they're not going to get another 30 years in their life, because they're going to be so depressed and so feel so useless that they just won't live anymore. And I do believe that. And I've seen enough examples to prove my point, I think, to myself anyway. So I hope when we're doing our mix of housing that we have a compassionate piece to us that says, you know what, these lives aren't over. These lives need some help. But I hope that we're not offering a solution that is so temporary that it's not humane. So with that being said, is there any other questions to Brandon on his report? It's only being received as information. I'm sorry? Oh, it's a funding request, yes. It's on the floor. It's been seconded. Do you want the clerk to read it? It is a funding request. I'm sorry. Do you want them to read it again? Everyone's clear? Okay. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried? Sorry, I went out on a limb there, but I've seen an awful lot of things lately that just don't suit me and don't suit the county of Brant, and it doesn't suit the way we treat people, even if they're cheap. Takes us to number 16 on the agenda, which is our bylaws. We only have two. Oh, I'm sorry, Councillor Miller, you had something.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I'm asking tonight, it's time sensitive, because there's an application in MDS. If I build a house in a settlement area, I don't need an MDS. If I build one in a non-settlement area, I need to do an MDS. And it's the same with an ARU. If I build in a settlement area, I need to do an MDS. If I build a non-settlement area, according to Jeremy, I need an MDS. My question is, these trailer parks that we have said, okay, in the new official plan, you can go to all year round, provided you meet certain conditions. My question is, they're technically not in a settlement area. I don't know if they're in a non-settlement area. I don't know what you call it. My question is, do they require an MDS? And I've asked twice different people, but I've never gotten an answer on it. And I know there's an application for one of our trailer parks.
Through the chair, yeah. Since they're not in a settlement area, they do have MDS, and there's MDS implications because they are a higher intensity residential use, so there will be MDS implications that they'd have to review. They're living areas, so we'll have to assess that. So I'm assuming that if we've already given some boundaries to those residential areas, that it's going to impact the neighboring farms. Basically, because they're already the mobile home parks would be existing and designated for that use. So that zoning is going to apply and give them the opportunity to develop there, and it's going to have MDS implications to somebody putting up a barn nearby, more so than the trailer park that is existing.
You're saying they need an MDS?
Yes.
Wow. Okay.
Because, yeah, they're outside of a settlement area. They will apply. Same as in some cases, I'm going to pick up the... They could say that a cemetery requires an MDS in the rural area, for example. You can exempt them, but, for example, even cemeteries in a rural area would require an MDS.
All right, that's the $10 million question. Thank you.
All right. Anything else, Councillor Miller? No? Okay, I didn't add anything to other business either, but I did attend the Western Ontario Wardens Caucus 2 days in Ingersoll, and I represented the county, and I let them know that we had dedicated the road to former Mayor Ron Eddy. They were very happy to hear it. They said it was suitable. They said it was the right timing, and they were very glad we did it. So I do bring greetings from the Western Wardens, and now I'll go to bylaws. Anybody going to try to stop me? No? We only have two, 1.25 and 2.25, and they're going to be read by Councillor Pierce.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Chambers, that bylaws 1-25 and 2-25 be read the first time.
All those in favor of the first reading of the bylaws? Second reading, please, Councillor Pierce.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Chambers, that bylaws 1-25 and 2-25 be read a second time and all preambles and clauses be adopted.
Are there any questions to either of our bylaws being
Preamble.
put through tonight? Yeah, preamble. All those in favor of the second reading? And if you could do it for the final third reading, please, Councillor Pierce.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Chambers, that bylaws 1-25 and 2-25 be read a third time, passed, signed, and executed.
All those in favor of the third reading of the bylaws? Thank you, which takes us to the end of our agenda, I believe. Yes, it does. Is there anything else for the betterment of the County of Brant? Seeing nothing, we will adjourn and we will come together again on January the 28th, and that is when we'll be doing some voting and some decision making. So thank you all for coming tonight. There's leftovers, I think, on the counter in the hallway. Thank you. And Councillor Chambers? Spencer?
Is this for the Thursday meeting? Starts at 9, estimated to go until 3, but I'm not exactly sure how long each presentation will take.